Have you ever pondered the unthinkable? What would be the consequences of a third world war? It's a chilling thought, isn't it? A scenario that, despite its grim nature, demands our attention. It's a question that takes us deep into the realm of the unimaginable, of a world engaged in a conflict of catastrophic proportions. Picture this: an era where the instruments of war have dramatically evolved since the first two world wars. A time when the weapons wielded are not just guns and tanks, but nuclear warheads with destructive potential that far surpasses anything previously seen. Let's explore the concept of nuclear warfare, a term that sends shivers down the spine of anyone who understands its implications. Nuclear warfare refers to a conflict in which nuclear weapons are deployed, causing widespread devastation and loss of life. The sheer power of these weapons is enough to obliterate entire cities, leaving nothing but ashes and echoes of what once was. Now imagine this power unleashed in the theater of a third world war. The detonation of several atomic bombs would not only result in immediate destruction, but could also lead to long-term consequences that affect the entire planet. One such potential aftermath is a phenomenon known as nuclear winter. Nuclear winter is a hypothetical scenario where the fallout from a large-scale nuclear war could lead to global cooling. This is due to the soot and smoke from the firestorms caused by the bombings rising into the stratosphere, blocking sunlight and causing a drop in temperatures. This could lead to crop failure, famine, and mass food shortages, creating a domino effect of catastrophe that stretches far beyond the initial impact zones. As we delve into this topic, let's remember the importance of peace and diplomacy in our world. Let's remind ourselves that these scenarios are the outcomes we strive to avoid, the futures we don't want to create. Our exploration of these possibilities serves as a stark reminder of the cost of conflict and the necessity for understanding, cooperation, and peace. To truly understand the potential consequences, we need to comprehend the power of nuclear weapons. Imagine for a moment the events of August 6th and 9th, 1945. The cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Japan. Two atomic bombs, Little Boy and Fat Man, were dropped. The destructive power was unlike anything the world had ever seen. In an instant, cityscapes transformed into apocalyptic wastelands. The immediate death toll? Over 100,000 people, with countless more perishing in the years following due to radiation sickness and cancer. Now, let's take that power and multiply it. Today's nuclear weapons are many times more powerful than those of 1945. A single modern nuclear warhead detonated over a city could result in millions of casualties. The immediate effects? A blinding flash of light, a fireball hotter than the surface of the sun, a shockwave flattening buildings in a wide radius, and lethal doses of radiation. But the destructive power of these weapons isn't limited to their immediate blast radius. The heat of the explosion can ignite fires over a much wider area. These firestorms can burn entire cities to the ground, creating plumes of smoke and soot that rise high into the atmosphere. This is where the term nuclear winter comes into play. These smoke plumes can block out sunlight, leading to a drastic drop in temperatures across the globe, potentially disrupting food production and leading to mass famine. And these effects could last for years, long after the initial detonation. It's important to remember that these are not just theoretical scenarios. These are the potential real-world effects of using nuclear weapons. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki were a stark demonstration of their immediate destructive power. But the long-term global effects? Those could be even more devastating. The immediate devastation caused by nuclear weapons is only the beginning of the story. Beyond the initial destruction, a nuclear war could trigger a chain reaction of events, leading to what scientists term nuclear winter. This is not your typical winter. It's a potentially catastrophic scenario of a global cooling effect following a large-scale nuclear war. Imagine for a moment a world where the sun's rays barely reach the surface of the Earth. The widespread firestorms, ignited by the nuclear explosions, would inject enormous amounts of soot into the stratosphere. This layer of soot, sometimes referred to as the smokosphere, would form a barrier, blocking sunlight and causing surface temperatures to plummet drastically. This phenomenon was first coined as nuclear winter in 1983. Scientists have used computer models to simulate the effects, taking inspiration from examples like the bombing of Hamburg and the Hiroshima firestorm. Recent models suggest that just 100 firestorms could cool the climate by approximately 1 degree Celsius. This might not sound like much, but it's enough to offset the impacts of global warming for a few years. But this isn't the only concern. The prolonged cold and lack of sunlight would dramatically impact global agriculture. Crops would fail, leading to mass food shortages. This could potentially result in famine on a global scale, adding to the already devastating impact of the nuclear war. The longevity of the soot aerosols in the stratosphere is still uncertain. Satellite data suggests they could dissipate within 2 months. But if thousands of firestorms were to occur, severe cooling could last up to a decade. While the concept of nuclear winter may seem like a distant, abstract concept, it's a very real possibility that could have catastrophic consequences. The human cost of a third world war, particularly one involving nuclear weapons, is unimaginable. It's a terrifying prospect that goes far beyond the immediate loss of life. It is not just about the millions, perhaps billions of lives that could be snuffed out in the initial firestorms and subsequent nuclear winter. It's also about the long-term effects on survivors and the environment. Let's try to comprehend the scale of such a catastrophe by looking back at past conflicts and nuclear disasters. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the Second World War resulted in the immediate deaths of more than 200,000 people. But the death toll didn't stop there. In the years that followed, thousands more succumbed to the effects of radiation sickness, cancers, and other long-term health issues. Then, there's the displacement of people to consider. We've seen this in the aftermath of conventional wars, where millions of people have been forced to flee their homes. In a nuclear war, this displacement would be on an unprecedented scale. Entire cities would be rendered uninhabitable, not just for weeks or months, but potentially for generations. And let's not forget the enduring health effects. Those who survived the initial blasts would face a future marked by the threat of radiation-induced illnesses. We've seen this in the aftermath of the Chernobyl disaster, where children born years after the incident are still suffering from thyroid cancers and other health issues. The radiation from a global nuclear war would be many times greater, and its effects would linger for centuries. To comprehend the human cost of a third world war is to understand the sheer scale of the suffering that would ensue. It's not just about the dead and the dying, but also about the living, those who would have to endure the long-term consequences of such a war. The human cost of a third world war is a stark reminder of the importance of preventing such a conflict. It's a reminder that we must do everything in our power to ensure that the horrors of nuclear war remain confined to the pages of history and never become our reality. We've explored a grim scenario, but it's crucial to remember that this is not a foregone conclusion. As we stand on the precipice of our imagined future, we're reminded of the power we wield, not just in terms of nuclear weapons, but in our ability to shape the course of history. It's easy to get lost in the dark alleys of potential devastation, but let's not forget the avenues of hope that are also at our disposal. Diplomacy, disarmament, and international cooperation are far more than buzzwords. They are tangible tools we can use to prevent the bleak narrative of a third world war. We've seen their power before. The Treaty of Tlatelolco, for example, successfully established a nuclear weapon-free zone in Latin America and the Caribbean. Then there's the Treaty on the Non-Proliferation of Nuclear Weapons, an international treaty aimed at preventing the spread of nuclear weapons and promoting disarmament. These are real-world examples of how diplomacy and cooperation can create a safer world. While it's true that the threat of nuclear war looms large, we must not lose sight of the fact that we have the power to change this narrative. We can choose to learn from our past, to understand the devastating consequences of nuclear warfare, and to take steps to ensure it never happens again. We can choose to support treaties and agreements that promote peace and disarmament. We can choose to elect leaders who prioritize diplomacy over aggression. We can choose to educate ourselves and others about the realities of nuclear war, and to use this knowledge to advocate for peace. In the end, it's not about ignoring the potential for disaster, but about doing everything in our power to prevent it. It's about acknowledging the immense power we hold, and choosing to use it for the betterment of all, rather than the destruction of many. The future is not set in stone. We have the power to shape it and make choices that lead to peace rather than destruction.